Now, on Monday morning, parents demonstrated at Hoërskool Jan Viljoen in Randfontein, alleging racism and other discrimination at the school. The demonstrations came after a fight between black and white learners last Friday, which was captured on video and widely circulated on social media. Now, given the country's history and the role that Afrikaans played as a language of oppression under apartheid, the issue is a sensitive one. 28 years into democracy, many Afrikaans medium schools still retain names which are monuments to the apartheid regime. To discuss who Jan Viljoen was and whether a name change would have any positive impact, I'm joined by social activist and higher education commentator Chumani Maxwele and founder of DiversiT Terry-Oakley Smith, together with Lidia, Rauch, the founder of Bloom Enterprises, and also we are joined in studio by Rian van der Merwe, FETSA's EXCO member. So let us just start this conversation then. I actually want to bring in Terry here. Terry, let's start with you. What do you make of what took place this week at Hoërskool Jan Viljoen?
Well, first of all, absolutely no surprise whatsoever. I mean, I think if anyone was surprised by this, they haven't had their eyes open over the last 30 years. This is an ongoing problem. It's been an ongoing problem since democracy, since 1994, and somehow we've done nothing about it except send in the Human Rights Commission, task teams, but we haven't put our foot down, created a clear anti-racism, anti-discrimination policy, not only for schools, but for South Africa, which will guide schools when these kind of incidents take place. And I think the issue of language that you mentioned, Sejo, is also extremely important. I think that Afrikaans is often used as a foil, as a method to keep black children out of these kind of schools. And I mean, I think the first thing that Jan Viljoen School should do, and which would make a huge impact, is change its name. Because as you say, it's lauding our very, very unhappy history. It's not showing us footsteps into the future.
I'm glad you mentioned that issue of the name change, Terry. I want to bring in Rian here. Rian, I mean, we heard from Terry the issue that, you know, we should not be surprised that this is what took place at Hoërskool Jan Viljoen. It is interesting, though, because when I was there on Monday, a lot of the parents said that this was a long time coming. What we saw on Monday, the fight, the infighting that we saw with the learners, they have said that this was a long time coming. Were you shocked by what you saw, and do you agree with Terry that there definitely needs to be a name change there?
Yeah, I think it's multi-layered and very, changing the name will not fix problems that are brewing, but it's part of the discussion. And I think we need to take a step back. The school is not something different to the community. No one decided the school's name apart from the history. But for the past, I think, 5, 6, 7 years, that school has been multi-language, multicultural, and parents, the community, own the school. I want to put on a few cornerstones in the discussion that there is no such thing as a state school or a government school in this country. That is a public school which should be represented from the parents and the community in the school, around the school, and they should stand in trust to the community. So if the parent community got involved and said, guys, we're transforming, let's talk about these things, symbols, names, and these kind of things have history about it. And we need to address these things. But there's no single body in a corner office that decide, we're not going to change the name because we decide so. Every school has an annual AGM. Every school has a 3-year cycle of SGB meetings. Many schools don't make their quorum at those meetings because the parents are not involved. So from a governing body foundation situation or association where we say, guys, get together around the table and fix the problems at your school. It has been brewing for a long time. But people should have been around the table long ago and not just waited for the explosion on last Friday. So yes, a name change definitely can be on the table and could have strides going forward. But changing the name of the school is not going to change the hearts of the people. So we need to look at it from both sides. And for me, it's one of the things that we need to keep discussing and say, How do we understand our community? How do we transform, not just in enrollment and in numbers, and now the school is transformed, how do we continually transform? How do we keep people around the table? A very critical element of the SGB in a school is that learners form part, fully members, full-fledged voting right members of a school. We've been seeing parents, we've been seeing school management, we've been seeing government, we've been seeing the media. But where are the learners? They have a voice on the SGB through the RCL structures. So I think there's a lot of things that's been brewing, but there were a lot of structures not followed and used to get the brewing from below the surface to out in the open. And why don't we talk about name change, emblem change, symbol change? How do we do this together? Because the school is not separate from the society. School is a reflection and a mirror of what's happening in the society. And the value system also comes, you know, you don't send broken kids to school and they get fixed at school, or vice versa. So I think it's very much multi-layered and merit in discussing the history and the past, but more merit than just that. If they change the logo in front of the school, it's not going to change the people's hearts.
There needs to be some kind of behavioral change.
Absolutely.
That needs to happen in the schools, Rian. Lidia, I want to bring in you here around this conversation of behavioral change. I mean, we hear Rian talking about the issue of SGBs needing, you know, the learners needing to be part of that. But there could be concerns, isn't there, around whether they can actually do much as learners, and the ratio to that, Rian, as well, would be quite interesting to see.
Absolutely. I think the important thing to understand and acknowledge is that our behavior doesn't change because of policy. Our behavior doesn't change because of name changes, and even not when we see diverse bodies in this space. So the fact that the school is now bilingual and that it's diverse does not necessarily mean that the experience change, nor the behavior of pupils as well as teachers, as well as the system in which these pupils are expected to function. So that's why I really agree with both Rian and Terry in that I'm not surprised in what happened at the school at all. But if you're interested in real behavior change, if we're interested in seeing the impact on the system, then yes, sure, a change in the school name will be a positive step in the right direction because we know that representation matters. But I believe that if we're interested in the real change, what is required is the actual perpetrators of racism to be held accountable for real intervention, like Terry also said, and for an actual commitment towards anti-racism, right? For that actual commitment and that action to follow. Because as a nation, we've not really dealt with the impact of our past, if we're honest with ourselves. That's why almost 30 years down the line, this is not a surprise. Because policy does not necessarily change our deeply held beliefs that we have towards one another, right? Policy only dictates law. So our history still shows up today and every day. And as long as we choose to ignore it and drive this narrative that we must simply get over the past, the longer it will keep on showing up, right? So the longer these kinds of things will keep on happening. But when we choose to acknowledge the impact of our past and actually choose to do something about it, to become actively anti-racist, then we can actually start eradicating the cancer that is racism. I honestly believe that a name change is a positive step in the right direction, but essentially it's just putting a plaster on a bigger cancer that is racism. And it won't necessarily lead to real behavior change without doing the actual work.
Lidia Rauch there, thank you so much for that comment. And we'll come back to this because the issue of behavioral change is something that we need to speak to because it's not necessarily just about the children. It's actually about the adults as well. It is learned behavior. What we saw on Monday at the school and Friday, it's actually learned behavior. But do stay tuned. We'll be continuing with our conversation around the issues of Hoërskool Jan Viljoen in a short while. Welcome back. This is Newsfeed AM. We continue our discussion around what happened at Jan Viljoen, whether a name change is what is needed from what we've heard from the panel. A name change could work, but the behavioral change is what is more needed. Lidia, I want to bring you back into this conversation. I am in conversation with social activist and higher education commentator Chumani Maxwele, together with the founder of DiversiT Terry-Oakley Smith and Lidia Rauch. She is the founder of Bloom Enterprises. In studio, we're joined by an executive member of FETSAS. Of course, that is a school governing body organization, and his name is Rian van der Berg. So let's just continue our conversation. Lidia, you spoke around the issue of behavior change. And I must say that, you know, from what I saw when we were at the school Monday and Thursday, it is not just initially about the behavior of the adults that needs to change. I mean, we did see the white parents standing in front of the gate, blocking the gate, and you know, trying to ensure that nobody else gets into the gate. We also saw the issue of black children and black and colored children being the only ones that were at the school on Monday. The behavior change needs to start from the adults, because that in itself will trickle down to the child, not so?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that also speaks to the system in which the child exists, right? The first system that you get introduced to as a child is the home in which you are raised, right? So that's why the responsibility on the parents is massive, right? As well as on the school, because those are the systems in which they exist. But if we think fundamentally about behavior change, where we have to start is our deeply held beliefs, right? Because our beliefs impact our thinking, which impacts our feelings and ultimately impacts the way that we show up in the world towards one another. But if we think that simply something like a constitution is going to be enough to regulate the way that we behave towards one another, we are making a mistake. This requires deep commitment towards anti-racism, and you are right, it starts with the school and the parents and the system in which we function. And that system in itself, unfortunately, because of our history of over 400 years, is one that is still systemically racist that we need to confront. And confronting it looks like a deep commitment towards anti-racism, in my opinion. And you're absolutely right, the responsibility does lie with the parents as well as, in my opinion, the school, and taking real steps that are tangible with actual real outcomes, and not just changing a name, but actually linking it to the action as well as the accountability that's very much needed.
Chumani, I want to bring you in here. I mean, we've heard from the other panelists around the issue of what they saw taking place on Monday. Nothing shocking at all, because of it had actually been building up for quite some time. What do you make of this situation? And do you also agree that a name change is something that needs to take place at Hoërskool Jan Viljoen?
Well, thank you. Thanks very much. Greetings to your viewers. Well, for me, I really think that the major problem here that we're faced with is deep-seated racism of white power, right? Without white power in South Africa, as it is exemplified by the structural racism and the capital power that white people have over this country, right? Now, if you don't deal with those things, which are economic questions, you will never deal with racism, because primary meaning of racism is power over other people, right? Now, that power derives, in the case of white people, from their economic power over black people, right? Now, I mean, I've been there around this issue of name change. I mean, we can say it here, but those of us who were practically involved in challenging the status quo at the university, I remember at UCT, when we talked about the symbols that represent racism, there was a serious resistance from our white counterparts, right? And I remember being in Stellenbosch when there was a removal of Verwoerd flag in Stellenbosch building, right, in 2016, all right? Now, there was a serious resistance against that. Now, who can, in the democratic state, can resist symbols of apartheid and then proclaim to be in a same country with the same people that you claim to love? There is no way. Now, my issue here is that the democratic project has failed as far as race relation is concerned. And of course, I understand the settlement negotiation that took place in 1990. But the settlement understanding that we ought to have today, we have to go back to what J.M. Coetzee wrote in 1991 in an article called The Mind of Apartheid. Coetzee says to us that we must go back to open the coffin. In the coffin, we will see the flesh of apartheid. Because he argues that we do not know what is apartheid. Now, by saying that we must go back to the coffin and open it, it means that we must go and talk about the life and blood of apartheid. In our instance today, what the student faced in Jan Viljoen is that they were faced with an open coffin, and they saw the flesh, the representation of apartheid in a flesh and blood through the white students there, through the leadership of the high school there. And this, for me, is not just there, right? You can talk about school change as much as we like, but the truth of the matter is that there's still Jan van Riebeeck School in Cape Town, right? Are you going to be shocked again 2 years down the line when the Jan van Riebeeck High School and the Jan van Riebeeck Primary School is in flare in race relations? No, I'm not going to be shocked with that. But because we are not taking a proactive stance, I mean, like the Human Rights Commission. Human Rights Commission has failed dismally to deal practically with the question of racism. And I think it is about time now that the Human Rights Commission is empowered with relevant people to speak truth to power. And of course, I'm not going to play here as if the idea of racism in South Africa, it has a lot to do with material condition. That is why many people are so silent, because they know you speak against white people in South Africa, you challenge their attitude, their racism. As a black person, you will suffer the consequences. And I know what it means to suffer the consequences in this country just because you've spoken against white racism in this country.
Now, I'd like to bring in Terry here. Terry, the issue of, changing the name is one thing. But we have to really look at changing management at the school. I mean, when I was there, you clearly see that the name of the school, yes, Hoërskool Jan Viljoen, but every other directive has been written in Afrikaans. Everything at that school is written in Afrikaans. We know that there are also allegations of racism against some of the teachers. We don't know much about the principal allegations, however, but if the principal has not been able to stand his ground in this instance, should there not be then an overhaul of management at that school, including more black teachers?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with exactly what Chumani said, and recall very, very well what happened at UCT not so very long ago. And can I just try and disabuse everybody of the idea that I think changing the name is the answer?
Yeah.
It's a tiny little thing, but which would have an important effect.
Yeah.
I really think that we need to get serious about racism in South Africa, exactly as Chumani says. And I also agree that the bodies currently set up to address it are not doing their work. In a school like Jan Viljoen, why is the school governing body so overwhelmingly white? And then I know that I'm going to be told, oh, well, these people, they don't want to get involved. If you look into it deeply, you'll find that meetings are held in the evenings very often, and that black parents can't even get there in the evenings. So it's not that they're not wanting to get involved. It's also that they have to sit in a room with white people who are fundamentally racist, and that isn't necessarily a good way to spend one's evening. So I think we should be looking at things like ensuring that in a country where more than 75% of the people who live in it are black, and where we, people like me, make up less than 8%, a school governing body should be representative of that. And we should find out, when can we have meetings? How can we make sure people get there? What do you really want for your children? And white parents who send their children to the school, I think, should be forced to sign an undertaking in terms of anti-racism. They should be educated about it. And they should then help the school to become a bulwark against the kind of ongoing racist behavior that we see. Teachers that exhibit racism, they should be immediately fired. How can you have a racist teacher in the school in the year 2022? It's just completely unacceptable. And where the principal where he or she is obviously unable to deal with the situation, is weak, is vacillating, I suggest they also be asked to step aside and we get somebody stronger, somebody preferably black, who will actually demonstrate that we're an African country. And there are many, I taught in the education department of BITS for many years. We send out many black teachers into the teaching profession year on year, and we see them staying in the same positions. We need to look at moving our African teachers up, giving them positions of responsibility, because that then shows the white parents, the white pupils, that a black man or a black woman can do it and can do it well. And they are actually in charge of our school. So, unless we tackle this problem really fundamentally and see it as a societal problem, we're not going to go anywhere with another Human Rights Commission investigation. Let's be honest.
Sure. Terry-Oakley Smith, really, just, that's quite interesting, because we do know that the Human Rights Commission is currently investigating this matter, and it is a societal matter indeed. We consistently hear the Department of Basic Education saying that education is a societal matter. Rian, I want to bring you back in here, because what is the plan then from FETSA's side as a school governing body foundation, really, so to speak? What is the plan? What are you going to do to try and quell the tensions at Hoërskool Jan Viljoen? But beyond that, we do now clearly see that more needs to be done, and just changing a name is definitely, like Terry said, it's just one part of the solution.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think it's very much multidimensional, multi-layered. Let's start with saying we have to adopt as a society, and we know it, it's in the Constitution. Racism has no place in our society. So we should really address that, if that flares up. But we should also acknowledge that not all 23,000 public schools in the country has the problem that erupted last week. So there are many facets to it. What we as FETSA are saying is that a school should belong to its community, the public school status of a school. And I agree, if parents are not representative on the governing body, and it's massaged in a wrong way because the meeting is at the wrong time, we have to hear our parents, because it's them that we give a product to. We teach their learners.
Rian, I just want to quickly interrupt you here. I'm sorry to do this, but we do know that from the conversations that we had on the ground on Monday, a lot of people telling us that Randfontein in itself is a racist area. So
that's what I want to say, and I want to agree with the other speakers. We're now addressing Jan Viljoen. But you can fix Jan Viljoen, but you don't fix, you don't send fixed kids back to broken homes. So suddenly it's an education problem. From FETSA's side, we say let's look at quality education for all learners at school, and let's focus the education sector on the education side of it. The societal needs and processes need to be addressed in Randfontein. If you say Randfontein is racist, I don't believe Randfontein is racist. I don't believe Jan Viljoen is racist. I believe there are people with racial problems and racist inclinations, and that are racist. But I don't think 1,000 people were fighting last Friday. It was probably a pocket of 40 or 50 kids that got involved. But 1,000 learners are losing education because of that. In the broad scope of what we see around the country, with many schools that have changed their names, that have transformed, which the governing body has representation from all sectors of that society, it is going fairly good. So we have to acknowledge that we've come far in 28 years. We have. We've got more schools with pit latrine problems than probably with racial issues. We're not making much news about that. So I'm not saying the racism issue should not be addressed, but I'm not saying that's only a school issue, only a white issue, only an Afrikaans issue. It's a broader societal issue. And that's what I agree with my colleagues on the panel. We've got to address this from the heart. I said on another newscast earlier this week, we cannot reverse engineer the fruit and the tree. And more policies is just more fruit. More rules, more government and legislation. We can't fix the fruit if the tree is not good. You fix the tree from the roots. And that's where I think what FETSA is doing is strongly supporting the views of the preamble in our Constitution. I go to many places and speak, and many people in this country have never read the preamble. It starts with the words, we the people, not them, the government. We the people must move. We the people must do a few things. And the first thing is recognize the injustices of the past.
Yeah.
And let's do it. Honor those who have worked and built this country. Respect those who... And the last thing is to believe that the country belongs to all of us. So recognize, honor, respect, and believe. Those are 4 big words that we need to adopt as a society in the schooling environment, but also in the broader society. To say, let's recognize each other, let's honor each other, let's respect each other, and let's believe together that this country must be good and fruitful and great for all of us in the future. And that's what, I mean, so we're in the constitutional dispensation here.
Yeah.
We believe it's strong enough, but people's hearts need to change, and we need to talk around the table and hear each other.
Okay. Well, that is FETSA's EXCO member Rian van der Berg. Thank you so much for coming into studio. And a huge thank you as well to all the guests that joined us on this panel. We had a social activist and higher education commentator Chumani Maxwele, founder of DiversiT Terry-Oakley Smith, and Lidia Rauch, founder of Bloom Enterprises. Thank you all for your time this morning. Conversations around Jan Viljoen, clearly something that will continuously be one that needs to continue to happen, a conversation that needs to continue to happen, and really just trying to find solutions as a country to such situations of racism.